He spat onto the grass, his eyes full of challenge as he glared at the old man in the army green jacket, sitting quietly on the bench. "You useless old geezers! The war is over! What good are you?" a young man shouted, causing his friends to erupt in laughter. The wind swept through the park. It carried a dreadful silence in the wake of that insult. The old man said nothing. He merely tightened his grip on the armrest, his cloudy eyes reflecting a profound sadness. No one knew he had saved the harbor from a deadly attack during World War II, and no one knew that in just a few hours, the entire park would witness something unprecedented. An armada of the U.S. Navy steaming into the bay, carrying a secret buried for half a century. Why do true heroes always choose silence? And what could compel an entire fleet to intervene for one insulted old man? Don't look away from this story. If you believe that every hero deserves to be honored, subscribe to Veteran Best Stories right now. An autumn morning on Charleston Bay was filled with the salty scent of the sea and a thin mist lingering on the water. The first rays of sunlight filtered through leaf-bare trees, falling onto the familiar wooden bench where an old man sat, silent as a forgotten memory. Walter Grant, 92 years old, small in stature, with thinning silver hair, clad in a worn army green jacket, quietly held a paper bag containing a loaf of bread and an old photograph yellowed by time. That photograph was all that remained of a tumultuous youth, when he had served as a navigation officer aboard one of the U.S. Navy's most powerful cruisers during World War II. Yet today, he did not sit there to revel in glorious memories. He only needed some space to breathe, to remember, to watch the wind ripple the water as though each wave echoed from the past. The small anchor insignia on his jacket, faded and chipped, was the sole trace of a soldier who had defended the coastline with blood and steel. No one asked him about it anymore. No one remembered. The sound of noisy footsteps shattered that silence. A group of young people, laughing loudly and chattering, approached. They wore the colors of a carefree generation: ripped jeans, colorful t-shirts, Bluetooth earbuds flashing red and blue. Among them, a boy with electric blue hair and mud-caked sneakers stepped forward, his expression half contemptuous, half curious. He looked Walter over and sneered, his voice mocking. "What are you doing here, old man? Waiting for the Grim Reaper?" Laughter erupted, echoing across the expansive park. Their careless jokes were razor-sharp, cutting into the heart of a man who had watched friends fall over the side of a ship. Walter did not react. He did not look back. He offered no reply. His cloudy eyes stared straight toward the lake, where the sunlight glittered like memories drifting silently. Yet deep inside, an emotion long folded and tucked away in his memory began to stir. It was not anger. It was not hurt. It was regret. Regret for those young people, raised in peace yet unaware of who had safeguarded it. Regret for laughter, so easily given, built upon nameless sacrifices. Regret for himself, for remaining silent all these years. Walter had once believed that greatness did not need boasting, but in that moment, when he heard their mocking laughter, he realized how lonely such a belief could be. His heart beat more slowly than usual, not from emotion, but from the weight of an unspeakable sorrow. His bony hand tightened around the edge of the bench. His knuckles protruded beneath paper-thin skin. That same hand had once charted maps, tapped Morse code to guide ships past minefields, and now remained still. He looked down at the loaf of bread, then raised his gaze to follow a single leaf drifting slowly to the ground. Everything had slipped away. His comrades, the decommissioned ship, the cheers on the cruiser's deck when the war ended. The group of youths had left, but the sound they left behind kept resonating in his mind. Perhaps, if he were still young, he would have risen and spoken, even argued. But now he knew. Age brought not only weakness, but also serenity before ignorance. He did not blame them. He only felt sorrow that the generational chasm had become an unbridgeable gulf. And what saddened him most was that he had allowed it to happen, simply by staying silent for so long. A seagull circled once above the lake, then vanished toward the distant shore. Walter closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen once more to the sea's roar in his memory. He still remembered the first time he boarded a warship, a 19-year-old with fiery eyes and unshakable faith in his mission. Now, it all felt as though it belonged to another world, but somewhere in his chest, that flame had never completely died. It was only waiting for a gust of wind. And that morning, that wind had begun to blow. Long ago, when his blood was still hot and his pride surged like storm-tossed waves, Walter Grant would never have sat idly by when insulted. He had been the first to leap onto the deck amid a storm of bullets. He had yelled at his superiors if an order put his men in peril. But time, much like war, had worn away those edges. Now he sat in silence, not out of fear, but out of sheer familiarity with being forgotten. The only remnant from those days of combat was not a medal or a commemorative photo, but a lingering pain in his left leg, a legacy of a wound received on Okinawa years ago. That pain gave no warning. It arrived only when the seasons shifted, as a silent reminder that he still lived, and still remained. In 1945, during a kamikaze attack on the USS Caldwell, Walter, then only 24, risked his life to save over 200 sailors trapped below deck when fire spread rapidly. He never recounted that event with pride. He spoke of it with a hush as solemn as a church bell at dusk, a memory both sacred and painful. Many of his comrades never returned. All that remained were grateful glances from the survivors and a few old journal pages written in the dark with trembling hands, listing the names of those who had departed before the sea breeze extinguished both flame and hope. Emily Grant, his only daughter, grew up in a home devoid of war stories. She had never heard of Okinawa. She had never seen her father cry. To her, Walter was just a quiet man who lived frugally. He held everything too tightly and concealed his emotions so completely that they seemed almost non-existent. She became a Navy engineer at Norfolk Naval Station, not because he urged her to, but because, in his silence, she saw a model to transcend. Yet that very silence kept them from speaking to each other often. She had once thought him cold. She had once blamed him for not showing affection. And it seemed the distance between them was formed not by disagreement, but by a wordless void. That morning, when the incident in the park occurred, Walter returned home as usual. He hung his jacket on the hook, placed the old photograph on the table, and sat gazing out the window. He did not know that, moments later, a passerby would post a short video online showing him being mocked by a group of youths. In the video, he offered no response. He remained silent, his gaze fixed in the distance, while derisive laughter rang out. That moment, captured unintentionally, touched something in the hearts of thousands. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. It had no background music, no effects, just an old man and a group of youths, but its raw authenticity caused hundreds of thousands to pause. The brief caption added by the poster read, "Veteran humiliated in the park." No one knew who he was. No one knew what he had done. But in those eyes so quietly sorrowful, something compelled people to leave a comment, share the video, or offer an apology on behalf of a whole generation. When Emily received a message from a coworker with the video link and a simple question, "Is that your father?" she thought she must be mistaken. She clicked, and there he was. Her aging father, silent, alone, yet, strangely, full of dignity. His face bore no anger, no bitterness, only a calmness, as if he had awaited this moment for countless years. She had never seen him like that. A part of her shattered, realizing she had spent her life viewing her father through the wrong lens. In that instant, something stirred within Emily, not pity, but recognition. She recalled the times he'd cleaned the old house alone, when no one helped. She recalled the small, locked cabinet where he kept letters from the war. She recalled his limp whenever the cold weather arrived. All those everyday things she had once taken for granted now held a history never told. She did not call to complain. She did not ask why he hadn't reacted. She simply picked up the phone and said, in a voice soft but clear, "Are you okay, Dad?" On the other end, he replied with a familiar line, "They're just kids. Don't worry about it." But Emily knew that silence was no longer an option, not because of the insult, but because a man like him deserved to know that someone was listening, that someone was seeing. She did not lean on her rank to demand action. Instead, she opened his military file, complete with commendations, emergency rescue certifications, and acknowledgments from 1945 never before seen by the media. She photographed them and sent copies to Naval Command, accompanied by a brief, heartfelt request. Let the people know that heroes never disappear, they only become silent. She wasn't certain what would happen next, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt she had done what was right, not only as a Navy engineer, but as a daughter who had finally seen her father more clearly than ever before. Over 300 miles away, in a room bathed in artificial light and the clamor of surveillance screens, Emily Grant had just lifted her eyes from the latest design for the Navy's next-generation radar system. Her mind still pulsed with electrical schematics and logical formulas scrolling across the monitor. Everything seemed to be running on schedule, according to protocol, until a message appeared on her phone. Simple, concise. "Is that your father?" She blinked, one blink enough to make her heart skip a beat. Emily opened the attached video. The phone trembled slightly in her hand as the image appeared. A silver-haired old man in a green jacket, sitting silently in the park, beneath disdainful gazes and mocking words from a group of youths. She didn't need a second to recognize him. Her father, Walter Grant, the man she had never seen weak, now quietly enduring ridicule. Her face turned pale. Something inside her chest felt as though it had been squeezed. All those years, she had watched him move slowly through the house, sometimes limping when the weather turned cold, yet never had he revealed such pain in his eyes. She didn't know which was more painful, the public humiliation itself, or knowing that he had borne it in silence, allowing neither her nor anyone else to see his suffering. Without hesitation, she hit call. The call connected after 2 rings. On the other end, his voice was calm, as always. "I'm fine, daughter." She fought back overwhelming emotion and asked softly, "Are you okay?" And, like a familiar shield, he replied gently, "They're just kids. Don't worry about it." But Emily knew. This time, silence was no longer an option. She had once been silent like him, believing that perseverance alone would overcome senselessness. Yet that image, that moment, had shattered everything. Now silence would be complicity. She set down the phone, rose from her chair, and, for the first time in her years of service, she acted not as an engineer, but as a daughter. Back in her private office, Emily opened a locked drawer, the place where she kept his most personal items, old copies of Walter's military records from the war. She had requested those documents from the Naval Archives out of curiosity, but had never used them. Inside were payroll sheets, summaries of heroic actions, tactical reports, and a rare memorandum from the Pacific Fleet commander, detailing how Walter Grant saved 213 shipmates during a kamikaze attack in 1945 through bold command and precise navigation. Emily needed no further introduction. She did not emphasize that she was his daughter. She did not seek special favors. She did not mention her rank. In the letter to Naval Command, she stated the facts, using straightforward language as steady as the man she sought to protect. She attached the video, cited the records, and wrote concisely, "The man in the video is former navigation officer Walter Grant, who once saved a fleet in wartime. Today, he was humiliated by ignorance. I do not request an award. I ask only for one right thing, to let people know that heroes never vanish. They only become silent." She pressed send. No fanfare. No guarantee the letter would reach the right person. But for her, it was the first time in her life she felt she had stood with her father, not in silence, but through action. But that night, Emily could not sleep. She sat in her modest apartment near the base, gazing at distant lights reflecting on the sea. She recalled childhood moments when her father taught her to fold a map with trembling but precise fingers. She recalled the way he described the ocean, not through tales of valor, but by evoking the scent of salt and the sound of taut rigging. She had once believed she understood him. Perhaps only now did she truly see the man behind that silence. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if Naval Command would respond. But she knew one thing. For whatever happened, she had not missed her chance to do right. It was not only recognition of his past, but healing for the silent distance that had grown between father and daughter over so many years. In the stillness of the night, Emily's heart beat with newfound certainty, not as an engineer, but as a daughter who had finally reclaimed a legacy she had never fully grasped. Dear audience, please grab a glass of water, relax for a moment, and continue listening to the story. The next developments are still unexpected. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see viewers joining us from around the world. Comment 1. If you think this story is worthy, so we can continue bringing you more great stories. The next morning, while mist still draped Charleston Bay like a thin veil over forgotten memories, the town stirred from its slumber when a strange sound shattered the dawn's meditation-like silence. It was not the chirping of birds or the rustle of wind through the oaks. It was deep, weighty, and powerful, the roar of warship engines entering the harbor. Residents poured from their homes, jackets in hand, eyes still heavy with sleep. They hurried toward the waterfront park, where every gaze froze in wonder and shock. Before them lay a formation of 5 Navy vessels, solemn and silent as if parading on the sea. American flags rippled in the early breeze, staining the sky red with pride. Under a sun not yet high, figures stood rigid on deck, shoulders square, eyes fixed on the shore, as though awaiting something monumental. At the center of the lead ship, Emily stood at attention in uniform, her face betraying emotion while remaining composed, like any soldier on duty. In her hands was a small, intricately inlaid wooden box. Inside it lay the Medal of Honor, the highest award her father had ever deserved, yet never asked for. It was a medal that had never been announced, lost among thousands of faded files, just like the man who once carried glory. On shore, Walter Grant sat on his familiar wooden bench, unaware of any plan. To him, this morning felt like any other, calm, misty, a stale loaf of bread in his bag. But then came the murmurs, the footsteps, the breathless urgency of a gathered community. And he lifted his head. What he saw made his heart stop for an instant. A Navy fleet steaming in, and there, on deck, was his daughter. Emily disembarked with a group of officers, her combat boots landing firmly on the steel gangway as though driven by purpose. Her face no longer bore yesterday's anger. Instead, it held a gentle yet unwavering resolve. She said nothing. No words were needed. Every sentiment she might have spoken had already been conveyed through her actions. Walter rose, not out of curiosity, but because something within him had just been touched. A touch that did not hurt, but made him catch his breath. She walked straight to him. Their eyes met, two gazes bearing decades of unspoken truths. Walter saw his daughter as if for the first time, not the small girl he once knew, but a grown woman, brave and profound. Emily said nothing. She simply smiled. That smile carried no boastfulness. It was a quiet apology, and a gratitude that needed no words. A senior officer stepped forward, adjusted his uniform, and stood at rigid attention before Walter. He saluted, formal and respectful. The sound of polished shoes against the dock echoed like a silent declaration. The officer bowed his head, and in that stillness, presented Walter with the box containing the medal. The park fell utterly silent. Only wind and the breaths of those witnessing a small, yet weighty, moment in history remained. Walter accepted the box with trembling hands. The cool wood against his palm bewildered him, not from the morning chill, but from emotion. He lifted the lid. Inside gleamed the Medal of Honor, resting like a dream once thought gone. He stared at it for a long time, as if beholding a lifetime. Unnamed sacrifices, friends who never returned, and pains never spoken. His arm trembled, but his eyes brightened. The light of a man who knew at last that his silence had been heard. Applause broke out, not scattered, but in waves, deep, resonant, like the swell of the sea. No one needed to be prompted. Everyone rose, clapping as if bidding farewell to a hero returning from battle. Even the youths who had mocked him the day before stood there. They said nothing, heads bowed, their arrogance gone. One boy, still with blue-dyed hair, stood motionless among the crowd, his eyes filled with something he could not speak. Walter did not look at them. He did not need to. He knew they were there, and he knew they understood, not through apologies, but through presence, a gift sometimes more valuable than words. For in that moment, amid applause and dawn's glow, a generation was reminded that freedom is not natural. It is preserved by those who never demanded glory, only a place to sit quietly each sunrise. And that day, the soldier, Walter Grant, was finally named not over a loudspeaker, but by the heartfelt respect of an entire community. In the days that followed, the town of Charleston seemed to enter an unprecedented wave of emotion. The story of Walter Grant, a veteran once humiliated in the park but later honored by an entire Navy fleet, spread like a slow-burning fire through every newspaper, every news segment, every social media post. From local bulletins to national television networks, everyone spoke of him. Not with bombastic language, but with reverence and gratitude. Yet, Amid that media storm, Walter remained unchanged, silent. He was invited for interviews by major television stations. There were offers to produce documentaries. Even emails from schools requested his wartime stories for their students. But Walter did not respond much. When a reporter came to his home, he simply opened the door, offered a cup of tea, and after a few polite remarks, gently declined. "I did not do this for fame. I only did what was right at the hardest time." Those words, unembellished, unheroic, stayed with people. They reflected how he lived and how he chose to weather this storm. From her naval base, Emily watched the unfolding events in quiet steadiness. She sought no praise, claimed no credit. She returned each weekend, sitting beside her father in the park, as if nothing had changed. They sat in silence, speaking little, but their gazes, the gentle way they held hands, and the occasional faint smile, these communicated the apologies, the gratitude, and the forgiveness that time had swallowed whole. A week later, the Charleston city government organized a special ceremony. In an emergency council meeting, the entire board unanimously approved an unprecedented proposal to erect a statue in honor of Walter Grant in the park where he sat every morning. Not because he asked for it, not because public pressure demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. They commissioned a local artisan, a veteran who had graduated from art school, to create a sculpture that would be emblematic not only in form, but in meaning. On the day of the unveiling, the park was packed. The atmosphere was not celebratory. There was no fanfare or booming music. Everything was kept simple, true to the spirit of the honoree. A white cloth draped the bronze statue. Beneath it was the image of Walter Grant, seated on a wooden bench, eyes fixed on the bay, one hand resting on his cane, the other dangling, his expression contemplative. No weapons, no marching uniforms, just an old soldier in an everyday moment. Yet that simplicity made the statue more powerful than any slogan could be. Below the statue, a meticulously carved inscription read, "Walter Grant, he kept freedom silent." No lengthy explanations required. 6 words carrying the weight of a lifetime and a layer of wartime memory once forgotten. Emily stood beside her father. They did not stand at the center. They stayed quietly among the crowd. She wore no uniform. He bore no medals. Yet her hand on his, warm, steady, served as a thread connecting 2 generations, 2 sorrows, and 2 sacrifices that had once walked alone. Walter clasped his daughter's hand, firmer than ever before. No thanks were spoken. No declarations of pride were needed. In his eyes, Emily saw everything. The crowd did not erupt in applause. No one chanted slogans. They held a respectful silence, many with hands over their hearts. Some elderly onlookers shed tears. A child stood confused but gazed intently at the statue. Other veterans, in worn jackets, saluted from afar. That silence, far from apathy, was the kind only genuine respect can produce. Like the hush when a flag is raised at dawn. Like the reverence when one stands before a comrade's gravesite. For Walter, it was not a day of glory. It was a day he finally saw his life not with regret, but with peace. He had once thought he would fade away like a shadow, unremembered, unspoken. But that day, as the wind swept across the park's grass, he knew memory does not vanish as long as someone listens. And sacrifice, however quiet, deserves to be remembered. His story closed not with a grand speech, but with a peaceful look exchanged between father and daughter. and between them stood a statue. Yet it was more than bronze. It was a testament to the human heart. Every morning, before the sun climbs high, the statue of Walter Grant stands quietly in the park. No music playing, no fresh flowers laid at its base, yet anyone passing by stops, not because of the image of an old man leaning toward the bay, but because of what it represents, a reminder that no one becomes great by speaking loudly. They become great by living loudly, silently, and with courage. He had no medals pinned to his chest during those years. No one talked about him in history classes. But now, just 6 words carved at the statue's feet, "He kept freedom in silence," are enough to make generations pause and look again. In that contemplative gaze lies the silhouette of all the unsung heroes who were never named. Walter never needed applause. He did not live for admiration, but it is precisely his quietness that made him an icon. He taught young people a lesson not found in any textbook: that courage is never out of fashion, that kindness need not be ostentatious, and that a life can be remembered not for achievements, but for character. Emily, his daughter, now often brings young cadets to sit around the statue. She does not speak of battle exploits. She speaks of humility. She does not romanticize war. She speaks of peace preserved in silence. And the children, having listened, often turn back to the statue as if it is whispering something that only the heart can understand. Walter's story is not an event. It is a reminder. And if you feel something stir inside when you hear about him, share this story. Let true heroes, those who once sat quietly in a corner of the park, never be forgotten. Subscribe to Veteran Best Stories to continue journeying with such inspiring tales. Because gratitude should not be a one-day celebration. It should be a way of life, a choice we make every day.